All right, so let me introduce Tareef Jafferi. So Tareef is probably one of the smartest guys you'll ever meet. So afterwards, if you get a chance, go have coffee with him, talk to him, and you'll be impressed, right? So he was formerly with Google, spent a number of years in Mountain View in California with Google, got very interested in Project Aristotle, and hopefully you share a little bit about that. And today, what he does is he's trying to say, how do I create, using digital tools, using AI, how do I create a workplace that is secure, a secure-based workplace or a psychologically safe workplace that people are happy in, that can drive results. So with that, let me pass the floor over to Tareef. Tareef, the show is yours.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. Those are incredibly large shoes to fill, so I probably won't be filling them. But it's really nice to meet you all. Manoj kindly gave us a very optimistic viewpoint of AI. I want to start with a more pessimistic one, if you don't mind. Something has been deeply bothering me for a very long time. Ever since AI has become something that we all use every day, is the idea that how come we're not really that much more productive, even though we have the tools to be productive by orders of magnitude more, right? That 10-minute email takes 2 minutes. That blog post that takes a whole day now takes 15 minutes. We're not talking about a 5-10% gain in productivity, or at least in pace of work. We're talking about 20x. But do we see a 20x increase in production value, in economic value that we're creating in organizations? We don't see that yet. And what's getting in the way of that? So I think a really good demonstration of this, I'm borrowing from the great Rory Sutherland. He presented this at Nudgestock this year, I think. And this is the idea that, I know you're familiar with this. This is a speedometer, so the numbers on the outside show you how fast you're moving. I don't know if you're familiar with the inside numbers. It's called a paceometer. A paceometer tells you at that speed, how long would it take you to go 10 kilometers, right? So at a 10 kilometer mark, it'll take you 60 minutes, right? 1 hour to go 10 kilometers. And the thing that really always puts me off is that the numbers inside are irregular. They have different spacing as you go faster. And this is the reason why if you're late to something, you get in your car, you open your Google Maps, Apple Maps, whatever, and it says, hey, I'm going to be 2 minutes late. I'm going to be, instead of traveling at 100 kilometers, I'm going to go at 140. And that's why you only gain 2 minutes, even though you feel like you're going so fast that you can make up for that time. But that's not how it works. If you went from 40 kilometers per hour to 80, yes, that's a twice gain. So you're saving that much time. So the next time we need to go faster, we have to think about that it's not about speeding in the car. It's about taking instead of taking 30 minutes showering, you take 15 minutes, right? That's how we make up for that time. But I think with AI and how we're using it today, we feel that we're so productive because we're moving so fast. We feel like we're going at 140 or 180, but probably not in the right areas. So I think this is where it brings two fundamental questions. Like, are we trying to speed up the right things? Maybe not. And why are we optimizing for speed in the first place? If your business looks like this, where you have clear skies, the path is very clear and it's a straight road, I envy you because most companies don't have that advantage or benefit, right? And in this straight road, yes, you can optimize for speed. You can say, everybody use the tools to go as fast as possible. But the truth is that the world looks more like, like that, where it fails in the middle of the presentation. We'll see what the world will look like, but it's not as straightforward, right? There's more curves, it's muddier, the weather is a bit dark, but that's the world that we live in. There's market forces working with us and against us all the time. There's competition. There's other cars on the road as well. So really great leadership, and it's always been the case whether with or without AI, but great leadership has always been about navigating the corners, not about the straight path. And today there are more corners to navigate than ever. Right? Roshan talks a lot about the paradoxical leadership. I think this is what it's about. There is certain types of leadership that succeeds in corners and others that work better on the straight path. You're going to face both of them all the time. You have to be able to decide which one to use at what point. When we're navigating corners, you cannot be asleep at the wheel, and that's why you need to be a conscious leader. There are three things that we need to do really well. And the first thing is anticipate. You need to anticipate the corner. So the question is, in your business today, are you getting the right information at the right time? Because most likely you're not, right? Think about how we're collecting information about your employees today. If you're using the traditional annual engagement surveys that you do, that's fine, that's a great tool, but really you're getting your information 4 months too late. Because by the time the information gets to the right person, it takes that long. Then you have to adapt. Are you using that information to respond to challenges and opportunities well enough? And finally, we need to be aligned. Does everybody understand? Are we all on the same page about what matters? Because we take that for granted often. And so today I wanted to walk through, from a leadership point of view, what can we do about this? I'm a behavioral scientist and I study people and I use data to study people. And one of the things that I found most powerful was the idea that leaders are choice architects. We design how our workplace works so that people make the right choices, right? We'll talk about what that looks like. What are the choices and behaviors we want to create? Well, the thing that should direct that are your values. What are your values? Your values are the things that should be shaping the behaviors within your workplace. And then we'll figure out how do we actually measure these things, because one of the biggest failures of culture is that it's not measurable. That's why when something is not measurable, you don't really know how good or bad it is. You make a lot of assumptions. We want to take those assumptions off the table. And finally, when we have all these things together, then we have a clear path forward on how to navigate these corners. I don't know if you probably have noticed things like this, but when you go to the supermarket or even in cafeteria, where you place food matters a lot. When you put healthy food in more accessible places, people end up eating more healthy, right? And so these are very small things that actually compound to something very important. This is a choice that a person made to place these objects, these food items there. In the workplace, it's the same. You make the choices about where things are placed. Secondly, the fly in the urinal, right? The sticker that's on there, it works every time. This is the thing that I love about behavioral science, is that it might look interesting and novel the first time, but the 80th time it still works. And it's still one of the most effective ways to keep a men's toilet clean, right? And it just works. And then the other example here is, if you want people to take the stairs, just by placing strips on the stairs already gets people to change their behavior. Instead of taking that escalator, they do take the stairs. And to note here, there's nothing fancy about this. It's not a working piano. When you step, there's no sounds that come out. It's just that when you're prompted, you kind of want to go that direction. And these are things that we can design. And so to dig into the science a bit, why exactly is this happening? The science of designing behaviors, there are three things that we have to look at. There's motivation, ability, and prompt. And when these three things converge, that's when we can predict whether a behavior will happen or not, right? So in the example I shared just now of the stairs, what we're doing is just increasing motivation. There's no ability difference. Just because their strips were on the stairs doesn't make you more able to walk up the stairs. So no ability was changed. The motivation was changed. And with motivation, there's intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Adding a bit of fun taps into our intrinsic. To make change even more powerful, we then tap into the ability aspects of it, right? So imagine you're able to move both motivation as well as ability. And to move ability, what we do in the workplace is make things easier. You can do that by bringing in tools, making your processes easier, or also developing skills. And I think that's what we're all here for today. Is that we're trying to improve our ability, because then it allows us to do things that we weren't able to do before. And then finally, prompt. Prompt matters a lot. The prompt of seeing something makes us then be prompted to do it. When these things come together, that's when you can really create meaningful change on a behavioral level. Now, it's not all about eating healthy and keeping our bathrooms clean, right? This is an example of a hospital in the US that was trying to get their doctors to prescribe generic medicine instead of branded medicine because it was just so expensive for them. And they didn't know what to do. They tried everything, training sessions, etc. The thing that worked phenomenally well was that they adjusted their IT system so that the generic medication was just the default setting. And they found that doctors didn't want to really change from the default setting. They just wanted to click next and then go to the next thing. And just that alone saved the hospital millions of dollars. But it just shows us that if we're intentional about how we design systems and we don't take it for granted, we can actually change real outcomes. The other example here is organ donation. In countries that neighbor each other, we see completely different rates. The countries that have an opt-out, meaning that if you don't want your organs to be donated, you have to opt out of the program, they see much higher opt-in rates because it's a default setting, right? So this is saving lives. So the question is, how can we apply these things to the workplace? And there's a few things here that I like to mention. The first thing is about smart defaults. What are the default states that you have that are there just because they've always been there, but actually shouldn't be there? So it requires a bit of conscious leadership. In my context of work, the thing that I look at and study a lot is feedback. How does feedback happen? And traditionally, feedback has always been anonymous, right? Oh, if you want our employees to really tell us about how they're feeling about things, we have to make it anonymous, otherwise they're not willing to say it. So we've always felt that the default setting, or actually the required setting, is anonymity. In our work, that's not the case. We have an ability to toggle anonymity, but we let the default state be open feedback. 96% of feedback is open today. Only 4% of people will toggle anonymity when they're sharing feedback, which means that when we get information, we respond and adapt really well, instead of always asking the question, this is great feedback, I don't know where this is from, I don't know who I need to help. So you could change the default settings. The second thing, like the piano-shaped staircase, if we make it fun and we tie into intrinsic motivators, the things that used to be very difficult, uncomfortable to do are things that we end up wanting to do instead. So in our line of work, when we want to encourage people to give recognition to one another, we've gamified it. And by gamifying it, it makes it something that didn't happen before happens a lot, over and over again, because it's something people want to be a part of. And we also made it very easy to tag core values. So now, not only is recognition given, your company values are being reinforced all the time, which is exactly what you want your values to be able to do, right? So remove the barriers to desired behaviors. And this works the other ways as well, right? Making the right things easy, you want to make the wrong things hard. After COVID, a lot of companies complain about having a really, really bad meeting culture. They're always in meetings. When you're hybrid mode, remote work, your calendar's filled with them. And it's a bad habit to have in your organization. The easiest thing to do is not just to eliminate meetings on a Friday or something like that. We found just add friction. Friction can be good. Right? The friction here is for every single meeting, have a clear agenda, have clear objectives, every single person in the meeting has to have a clear role. See all your meetings disappear, I guarantee it. Nobody wants to go through that friction. They'll be much more intentional about having that meeting in the first place, and you'll save a lot of time. So friction can be good. Now, I think the key idea here is design dictates behavior more than willpower. So if you're going to try to motivate people to change all the time and keep them motivated, and why do I have to tell them 5 times to do this? The point is that you probably designed your system wrong. And there are ways that you can design it to make the right things easier to do. All right. Now let's focus on what are the right things that we should really be focusing on the most. And this is where, this is something that I'm really passionate about, which is values-driven leadership. Understanding what your values are and designing your culture around those values. So you don't want your values to just be wall art, right? You want them to be part of daily operations and decision-making. A quick kind of heuristic that I use that I wanted to share with you was When you have values, they kind of fall into 3 different buckets, right? There's permission to play values, which I would say are values that you should have, but they're just your baseline. This is what you need to be able to work here. Things like respect and integrity. Those are not core values. They don't set you apart as an organization. They're just things that we need to uphold because they're important to us. Your core values are the ones that should set you apart. They're the things that you value more than anybody else in your space. That's what will take you to, that's what we've decided that we will uphold and value more than anything else. And then you will have your aspirational values, and your aspirational values, you don't want to have more than one. Your values should not, most of your values should not be aspirational. And if you have an aspirational value, a popular one is sustainability, you can't communicate sustainability into existence, right? You have to actually fundamentally change how you work. You have to bring in new skills, bring in new tools. So you can't focus on too many aspirational values at once. But you want to have your core values, and your values should guide every decision and design choice. So I'll share with you that most companies don't really do this as well as they should. There's a company with these four values: communication, respect, integrity, and excellence. And when I saw this, it resonated with me because one of my company values, one of them is excellence as well. I don't know if you can guess what company this is from that has these great values. It's a company called Enron. And it shows us that just because you have values doesn't mean that people will live by them. And it's actually been scientifically found that actually it works against you when you don't make it matter. That people use their company values, as a mask to do bad things. The values will take care of it. It'll make us look good so that we could do other things on the side. So that's what actually happens when we don't make our values matter at all. The companies that make their values matter are the winners. And I'll share you, there's a lot of examples. I think I have time for 2. So I'll share with you, Zappos famously conquered e-commerce for shoes when it didn't make sense for them to win that space. Right? Amazon tried it didn't work. And the idea, and they figured out, was they needed to have customer service so good that people would want to they wanted to return their shoes, because that was the issue. You purchased your shoes, it didn't fit you, and you had to return it, made people not want to buy shoes online. And so they cared about customer service so much that they introduced something called the offer, which is this idea that I hired someone, I'm putting them through a week training on how we do customer service at Zappos. At the end of the week, I'm going to offer them $2,000 to leave. And that's how much they cared about great customer service. Because if you want to take the money, just go, because it means you care more about that than about our culture and what we're trying to do here. At Amazon, they have a practice called the empty chair, which is the idea that in a meeting room, there's an empty chair always there that represents the customer. Right? One of their values is customer obsession. And it's a great practice because it helps you scale this value. You cannot be in every single meeting trying to represent the customer. So they've created a practice where they've scaled it so that every single practice, whether virtual or not, there's an empty chair that will always be the voice of the customer, so that when we don't know where to go, what direction to take, what decision to take, we can look at that empty chair and say, okay, this is best for the customer, let's go here, this direction instead. So if we want to dissect this, there's a few things that make a great practice, right? 1, alignment with your core values. 2, simplicity. 3, make it memorable. 4, make it scalable. And 5, make it measurable. So I encourage you to go back and take one of your values and turn it into a practice. And if it seems absurd to other people, that's okay. It should be. Because it should be something that because you value it so much, you're willing to do it when nobody else is. And that's when it makes it a sticky practice. The challenge with culture is, how do we know that these practices are actually creating impact? And how do we know if our values are living and breathing in the first place? And this is why when measuring and scaling leadership becomes very, very important. I'm in the data every single day trying to understand what are the biggest levers that impact organizational change. I study both leading and lagging indicators. So lagging indicators are things that when you do things really well, you'll find out later that that things have gone well. Employee satisfaction is typically measured using a metric called ENPS, Employee Net Promoter Score. And it's something that's great to measure. It's not, it's a very simplistic metric, but also can tell you a lot. It comes from the question, on a scale of 0 to 10, how likely would you be to recommend your workplace to others? And it signals great workplaces. Great workplaces are places that have really high scores. And so by just putting this simple measure in place, maybe on a quarterly basis, you'll see how you fare among everybody else in your space, domain, and it becomes very useful. But these are lagging indicators. We want to understand leading indicators as well. And I want to focus on value specifically. So let's say you have a value that is something like continuous learning. And because you value it so much, you've dedicated 20% time for your employees to pursue continuous learning. You also set this great budget aside, a budget that no other company would have set aside for their employees. And you want to figure out if these values are actually being lived by your employees today. Then what the best practice that we've come up with is designing 3 questions. One is a quantitative question. So it's a quantitative way to measure how strong this value is. And then you have 2 qualitative ones. So the quantitative question might be, how often do we seek out learning opportunities? Options from always to never, right? And then for the qualitative ones, which are very important as well, we're looking at, we want people to think about something that will happen in the future and something that happened in the past. So what new skills do you plan to learn this quarter? Helps them think forward. And then what was the most valuable thing you learned recently? Helps them think backwards. Questions are an incredibly powerful intervention tool. That's why even in a therapist setting, all it is asking questions. Because questions get us to think, and by understanding and dissecting that, it gets us to act in the ways we want. So think about that next time when you're designing a survey for your team. Don't use it as a data collection tool. Use it as a relationship building tool and a thinking tool. And here you can get people to think about your values that in a way that will impact their behavior going next. And when you measure this, for example, that question, how often do we seek out learning opportunities? Because this is your value, this is not any ordinary metric that we're measuring. You only take the most extremely positive response as the success score. So if only 15% says always, you're not there yet. Every company would say, yeah, you know what, 15 plus 36, we're fine. We could include sometimes in there as well. We're doing well. You're not. If that is your value, you take the 15 and say, I want to do better than 15. Because I've gone out of my way to gift people time and money to do this, and yet we're not there yet. And it's a value, not because it looks nice on paper, but because it serves a business purpose. If you have continuous learning as part of your work, it means that you've put it there because you know that if people do this, if we value this, it is better for us as a team, as an organization. And imagine doing this for all your values. You have 5 values, great. And measure this on a quarterly basis. How strong are your values today? Measure this quarterly and you'll see how you trend over time. And if there are scores that are not strong enough, we need to do more to reinforce them, to uphold them, and put together practices. So the path forward here is that we need to slow down to speed up. AI is fantastic. Of course, I'm a huge advocate of it. I use it every single day. But I'm also very aware about where it should be placed. And it's often placed in dangerous places where we're only optimizing for speed. Because the thing is, AI takes away the thinking from us. It gets this thing to think for us, and this thing doesn't have the same value systems that we do. And so we really want to be conscious about where we place AI into our workflows and into our organizations today. So that curvy road, you can pave it so that it's something that will be safe, that will be something that people want to be able to trek through every day. And you want to be able to anticipate things really well, which means that you could use digital tools to gather real-time feedback so that you know what's going on at all times. Then you want to be able to adapt, right? AI can help us turn feedback into insights in less than 3 minutes. So whatever used to take you 4 months doesn't have to take you 4 months anymore. So imagine working where whatever insights are happening on the ground, you know about it right away the next day so that you can respond and adapt, and your teams can adapt as well. And finally, We need to be able to reinforce, uphold, and ensure that our actions reflect our core values. This is the hardest part, but also the most important part in leadership today. Our values that we have put in place within your organizations aren't wall art. They have to tell people that this is what is different about working here. This is what we value. And when their personal values align with your corporate values, that's when the magic happens. Because that's when intrinsic motivator is elevated every single day. You don't have to do team building exercises every week and a half just to keep people motivated anymore. Nothing against team building exercises, they're great. But you don't want to have to rely on extrinsic motivators all the time to motivate people. So we want to be able to do these things really well. And I think the final message here is that conscious leadership is a continuous journey of intentional design and thoughtful navigation. That we cannot be asleep at the wheel right now, more than at any other point in time. Because there's more turns and curves in the road today than ever. But by being choice architects, by going out there, looking and seeing what systems we have in place and how to tweak them so that the right choices are easier to make, will go a very long way. Secondly, focus on the behaviors that are aligned with your values. Make your values matter. And finally, there is a way to measure this, right? It's not something that you can just leave for it to happen and hope that it works. Put certain measurements in place. It doesn't take long. But when you have these measurements in place, they can be managed and we can make all of us accountable. Because at the end of the day, when we build an organization as leaders, we're not doing this by ourselves. We're doing it with everyone that we work with. So wishing you the best of luck in your conscious leadership journey. Thank you so much for your time.